Hello there! We have made it. We have finally come to the end of the series where I try and list every single Force power or Force use in the whole of canon. Part 1, we covered the Jedi and anyone who kind of uses the Force in a similar way to the Jedi. Part 2, we talked about the Sith and anyone who uses the Force in a similar way to the Sith. Part 3, we talked about the Night Sisters, and today it's everyone else. If you've not seen any of the other videos in the series, make sure you watch them and then come back to this one, because there'll be some things that some of these Force users are able to use, but they've kind of already been covered in the previous videos, so I won't really mention them here. We will start off with the Chiss. The Chiss are interesting when it comes to their Force sensitivity for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Chiss often lost their Force sensitivity, or almost always lost their Force sensitivity as they grew up from a child to an adult. Also, the female Chiss were a lot more likely to be Force sensitive, when they're children that is, than the male Chiss. The Chiss referred to their Force sensitives as Skywalkers, and also the Chiss referred to the Force as the Sight. The Chiss basically utilise the Force in two ways, which they refer to as the second sight and the third sight. I know, the most creative naming you have ever heard. The second sight is a lot less common than the third sight, and if a Skywalker has the ability to use the second sight, they can telepathically communicate with another Skywalker with the second sight. And that's basically what it is, it's telepathic communication. The third sight is basically precognition, which is definitely not unique to the Chiss. In fact, it could be on the Jedi list, it could be on the Sith list, it could be on the Night Sister list, but I decided let's leave it on the Chiss's list because they don't have as many Force users as the others. They use it to navigate through hyperspace, so where most of the galaxy use navicomputers, instead the Chiss use Skywalkers to navigate through hyperspace. So a Skywalker will be on the bridge of the ship and basically navigate the ship through hyperspace. As I said, this is not unique to the Chiss in any way. We see Anakin is able to use this, so Qui-Gon says he can see things before they happen in The Phantom Menace, and that's before Anakin has had any Jedi training. Darth Vader is able to use this in Thrawn Alliances, so he basically takes the role of a Skywalker in the Unknown Regions in the Thrawn Alliances novel. And I'd imagine that basically all Force users are able to use precognition in some regard. So although it's on the Chiss's list, it could be on all the other lists. Next on to the Wands. The Wands are three very, very powerful Force users who live on the planet Mortis. We see them in the Clone Wars and we see murals of them in Star Wars Rebels. They are the father, the son and the daughter. The daughter is basically an embodiment of the light side, and I would argue that she is able to use all the light side Force abilities that we talked about in episode 1. The son is basically an embodiment of the dark side, and he is probably able to use all the dark side uses of the Force that we talked about in episode 2 of the series, and potentially even Night Sister magic, although in the series we don't see him utilise any Night Sister magic. And the father, I would imagine, is probably able to use all aspects of the Force. He's basically neutral, he basically keeps his daughter and son in check, make sure they don't kill each other, and along with all the powers that we've already mentioned in both or in all of the other videos, they are also able to use multiple other Force powers, which I will go through now. First of all, they are immortal. They cannot be killed and cannot actually be harmed by a lightsaber. The only thing that actually can kill them is something called the Dagger of Mortis, and in fact they are all killed. The son and daughter's power, a lot of it stems from the father, and the daughter is killed by the Dagger of Mortis. The father kills himself with the Dagger of Mortis, and because he dies, the son is then made mortal. Then Anakin is able to kill the son with a lightsaber, and so they do all end up dead by the end of the Clone Wars arc that we see them in. But to start with, they are immortal, and there may be other powers that basically come from the father, and that if the father dies, then the son and daughter lose some of their power. In the Clone Wars arc that we see the Wands in, we see the son do multiple things that are considered dark-sidey, because he is an embodiment of the dark side, and he does multiple things that we've already talked about, so for example Force Lightning, but he is able to cause very, very vivid visions. So Anakin sees a vision of Darth Vader and what he will become, and in fact the father has the power to basically make him lose that memory. And that is the only way to bring Anakin back to the light side, because Anakin sees these visions and is then almost possessed by the dark side and becomes dark side Anakin temporarily in the Clone Wars. He is also able to almost control people, so we see that he bites Ahsoka when he's this weird rat creature, and Ahsoka then becomes basically evil Ahsoka. She fights against Anakin and Obi-Wan, and then actually, when he stops controlling her, she dies, and the only reason she comes back to life is the daughter is able to bring her back to life in some regard, and that's where Morai comes in. Basically, the wands, all the Force stuff associated with them is very weird. I will also mention they live on Mortis, and so because they are so powerful, they are able to control the weather on Mortis, and in fact even control nature on Mortis, so kill plants just by touching them, or raise plants from the ground by almost just willing it to happen. Now, I'm not sure whether they'd be able to do that on other planets, but they certainly are able to do it on Mortis. They are also able to shapeshift. Well, the daughter and son we see shapeshift, so the son becomes a bat creature, and the daughter becomes almost like a big version of Morai, which is like a bird. And that's basically the wands. As I've said, they're probably able to do a lot more stuff. We've just not seen it, which is good for me, because this video would be very long if we saw them for a lot longer. In the same vein as the wands, we'll now move on to the Bendu. The Bendu lives on Atalon, and we don't really know what he is. He's a rock creature with a head, and he seems to almost be above human understanding. That's what he says to Kanan anyway. He doesn't seem to be able to die, because even when Thrawn kills him, he then becomes this spooky cloud thing that strikes lightning at all the people on Atalon. He's very weird. He seems to know the Force quite well. He calls the dark side the Bogan and the light side the Ashla, which is interesting. We'll move on to the Ashla later, but that's what the Lasat people call the Force. So maybe there's something there, but really the Bendu again is a bit like the wands in that very mysterious, don't really know the extent of the power, but just very, very powerful. Now on to the Lothwolves. The Lothwolves are wolves that live on Lothal. They seemingly are able to access the world between worlds to travel great distances across Lothal in seconds. They use this to help Sabine and Ezra and the rest of the rebels escape from the Imperials at one point in Star Wars Rebels. They have a very mystical connection with the Force, kind of like the ones in the Bendu. It's very difficult to describe what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. Basically, they're Force sensitive, and the only use of the Force that I can pin down is that they're able to travel great distances utilising the world between worlds in very, very small amounts of time. We're kind of looking at Star Wars Rebels at the moment, and so I will just mention, in one of the Star Wars Rebels episodes, Ezra mind controls an AT-ST driver to make the driver shoot at his own stormtroopers and then drive off a cliff, basically. I didn't know whether to put this in light side or dark side, because it is when Ezra is talking to a Sith holocron, and so maybe it's dark side, but I put it in other because I didn't really know where to put it. Next on to the Zepho. The Zepho are an ancient species of Force users that used to live on the planet Zepho. We see them in Jedi Fallen Order. They refer to the life wind as the Force, and that's basically because on Zepho the Force manifested itself as a strong wind. We don't really know how they utilise the Force, because we don't really learn that sort of thing in Jedi Fallen Order, but they could probably use it to do telekinesis, which we've covered, again, many, many times in this series. They probably were able to do other things, and they were certainly very powerful if they were Force sensitive. Next on to Mistweavers. They refer to the Force as the luminous mist. They are able to spin intangible strings of the Force into resilient silk strands. They're from the Legends of Luke Skywalker novel, and that's the only place that we've seen them, so little is known about them. And although that novel is called The Legends of Luke Skywalker, it is a canon novel, so it's not Legends, it's canon. But it's not called The Canon of Luke Skywalker, it's called The Legends of Luke Skywalker. Anyway, moving on. Next on to the Lasat people. The Lasat people referred to the Force as the Ashla. They probably were able to use the Force in many ways that we've already mentioned, but they could also channel the Force using their bow rifles to see the past and future. They could also channel the Force using their bow rifles to safely travel through an imploded star cluster to get to their true home planet of Lyra-San. Next on to a group of Force users known as Force Priestesses. They lived on a planet called the Wellspring of Life, which was seen in the Clone Wars. Yoda visits them because he needs to learn how to manifest himself after life, i.e. becoming a Force ghost. They themselves are kind of Force ghosts. They're already dead, but they help him, and then when he asks to see their face, they all disappear. They're able to make people to see. They're able to make people see illusions. They seemingly have control over nature, or at least the nature on the wellspring of life. They also float around, so they can probably fly, and in fact they're probably able to do a lot more. They are very, very powerful. We just didn't see them for that long, which again is good, because this list would be a lot longer if they were on screen for a lot longer. Next, on to the Mustafarians, the people that live on Mustafar. They refer to the Force as the life current, and some of them are able to manipulate the lava. It's probably just telekinesis. There is also a story in the Tales from Vader's Castle series, which was a comic series, and again, it's a bit like Legends of Luke Skywalker in that it may not be canon, but it's a canon story, kind of legends within canon, about a witch who could raise dead Mustafarians as zombies. Whether it's true or not, I'll let you decide, but it's there. I decided to include it. Staying on Mustafar there was something called the Bright Star. Now, the Bright Star itself wasn't a force power, so I won't really touch on it, but basically there was a character in the Vader Immortal series where we see the Bright Star called the Black Bishop. He was kind of between life and death. He'd been semi-raised from the dead by his wife. He was able to freeze time and teleport and cause visions. He'd been a Force sensitive when he was fully alive, and so who knows what other powers he was able to use after being semi-raised from the dead by the Bright Star. Moving on an unidentified planet in the Vagadar system, which is all the planet is ever referred to as, some people were able to use what is known as stone power to manipulate what they called the Blue Stone. It's a bit like telekinesis, but in fact it's very like telekinesis, but Yoda was unable to use his standard telekinesis on this Blue Stone, and so had to use stone power. Now, it turned out that this Blue Stone was actually a living creature, but we won't get onto that really. Basically, stone power, another use of the Force. And finally, onto probably the weirdest Star Wars canon we have ever seen. This all comes from a comic arc called The Screaming Citadel, where there was a queen of the Screaming Citadel called the Queen of Katarthaton, which I will from now on refer to as the Queen of K. She was an entity of a Bursian symbiote who possessed a humanoid. The Queen was basically the strongest symbiote, so it didn't have to be female, and it controlled every other symbiote in the hive mind. So at one point Luke Skywalker is possessed by one of these symbiotes, and then that symbiote decides to try and take control of the hive mind to be in charge, because Luke Skywalker is potentially a stronger host than the current Queen. Now, the Queen and some of her advisors were able to utilise Force Drain in a slightly different way to the way that we see the Sith and the Night Sisters use it. Basically, they kind of suck red life force out of people's faces and their mouths. Very weird, but that's the Screaming Citadel. Yeah. And that's about it. We finished with a weird one, but I think we're done. Obviously, many of the Force users that we've mentioned in this list, we've not seen that much in canon, and so they're probably able to use the Force in many other ways. And in fact, they're probably able to use the Force in some of the ways that we've mentioned in the previous videos. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Remember to like the video, it's completely free. Comment down below any Force uses I've missed throughout the series. Comment down below anything that you want to tell me within reason. Remember to subscribe to the channel, it is completely free. Completely free, just like liking the video is completely free. Watch any of the other videos I've made, there's a great one suggested in the bottom left for you. And that's about it. Bye!